Hello, my name is Henry Keane. This is an interview on UATV. Well, let me introduce someone to you who wears many hats, but mostly military ones. Well, such yourself, a sniper, helicopter pilot, a capable Abrams AIM-1 tank battle unit commander in Iraq, first field grade officer wounded in Afghanistan war, overall 6 tours of duty in Afghanistan and 2 more in Kurdistan, and carrier of both Bronze Star Medal and the Purple Heart twice. He has been supportive, to say the least, of Ukraine since the Russian invasion in 2022, and like to refer to himself as, I quote, the man now pipelined to share information with members of Congress of the United States on the war in Ukraine. I'm proud to give you Senator Tom Brewer is with us tonight. Senator, thank you so very much both for your service and for accepting the call.
Well, thank you for having me and giving me an opportunity to make sure that the word gets out on what's happening in Ukraine.
Straight to questions. Your frontline experience, of course, in Ukraine as someone who saw the war not from the office but from the actual trenches, and also here in Ukraine, not only Ukrainian war, but this also. You have visited Ukraine, I think, for, what, 8 times? What changed? I mean, in terms of actual combat on the battlefield, what has impressed you the most from 2022 to today?
Well, first, people need to understand that the combat that we see in the American Army and really all of the NATO forces that were part of ISAF, the International Security Force Afghanistan, was minimal compared to what the Ukrainian soldiers are seeing. We had a very structured situation where you lived on combat outposts or camps, and you would go out for a mission for a day and then come back and take a break for a day or two. Most of your engagements were small engagements. Roadside bombs were probably the most effective as far as damaging or injuring NATO soldiers. And to come into an environment that I saw on the Eastern Front, it was day and night difference. I mean, this was World War I, World War II, full
Hmm.
fighting day, night, virtually no breaks. It was just impressive that, for one, they're able to continue that pace, but also that they're able to go up against an army that they were never expected to be able to go toe to toe with and to defeat them in detail on the battlefield.
Well, I'm sure you had a thought or two about what the Russian army actually is before you even visited Ukraine. But after you saw what you saw, your attitude towards the Russian army, if compared with what you were thinking back in the day, did it change in any way as of today?
Well, understand that those of us that are a little longer in the tooth and have been in the military for a while, because I go clear back to the 70s, our purpose in life was to train to fight the Battle of the Fulda Gap in Germany.
Mm.
And we studied the weapons, we studied the tactics, and we were prepared to have that fight. And that was the Soviet Union. But a lot of it has carried over, the type of weapon systems and tactics.
Right.
But I think all of us were surprised, whether you go to Ukraine and see it firsthand or whether you read about it in the papers, that this army that we saw as this this giant modern sophisticated army that would be able to defeat any army in the world, and at that point were perceived to be probably the number 2 army, number 3, depending on how China fits in. But remember that China has never fought a war in recent times, and so no one really knows about them. Russia, on the other
Right.
hand, they've been in Syria. They were in Chechnya. That they have been on the battlefield. But if you look in detail at what they did in Georgia, what they did in
Mm.
Chechnya, and what they did in Syria, there's a lot of indicators there that they were not the army that they bragged about being, and that they had some flaws, and those flaws showed up in those smaller engagements, and now they've just been compounded with the battles that we're seeing in Ukraine now.
And these flaws, What are they?
Well, they have no NCO Corps. And of course, the American Army and NATO countries live by their NCO Corps, because what you're saying is this sergeant is smart enough and trained well enough that he can take command and he can make decisions and he can help make sure that that objective is seized, and they have a structure where only the officers know what's going on and are really the only ones trained at a level of leadership that allows them to command on the battlefield. And so if something happens to one of them, or if they have a weak leader, that unit is in peril right away. Now, add to that their failure with logistics. Now, some of that's, as a result of Ukrainian uh, weapon systems that are striking deeper and deeper and are taking that ability to resupply the line away. But they have issues across the board, logistics, administration, and just pure leadership of units. And none of this can be fixed very easily. As a matter of fact, I think as time goes on, they only compound themselves more. They have a mindset that you don't want someone who knows as much as you do as your subordinate, because he might take your position. And so, we work hard to find someone better than we are, so that if something happens to us, we know that those soldiers in that unit will have the best opportunity for success. It's just a completely different mindset.
Right, well, that's the rigid system Vladimir Putin built, right? He would prefer what he likes to hear instead of actual intel reports. Or I'm wrong here, being.
Well, that compound with the fact that if you don't give him a good report, you're probably going to come up
Right,
missing. So
exactly my
uh,
point. Right.
they have built their house of cards, and I don't see how they can change the situation very much, because they don't have the reserve. Their best and brightest soldiers have been killed in the war. And as they become weaker and less effective, Ukraine is becoming more effective and starting to be able to affect their ability just to do day-to-day operations.
Right, effectability, let's say tactics of modern warfare. As an Afghanistan veteran, sniper, combat officer, not a theorist at all, what technology is currently changing war faster than all the others do? All the others do just as well, but what is the main one? Would you say?
Well, I think any country you talk to, especially of the key NATO countries, for example, but I'm sure China
Mm,
is of the same mindset. The drones have changed the complexion of the battlefield so drastically. And what's even more impressive is Ukraine's ability to go from making 3 million drones a year to, I think they're projected to make 7 million next year. They are the ones that the United States is now going to learn about drone technology. Now, you wouldn't have thought that in 2022. And, it's why there are so many of us now that feel so strongly that we are foolish not to allow Ukraine into NATO, because when this war ends, the best trained, best equipped, and best prepared for the future in the way of combat operations will be the Ukrainian army.
well, if NATO doesn't want to accept Ukraine in its structure, maybe we should be thinking as Ukrainian nation to accept NATO with us. So maybe that will
I,
work. The
I,
other way
I would
around.
I would totally agree with that. I think that is probably a fair assessment, because we saw in Afghanistan that there are countries within NATO that really do not have a fire in their belly to fight. They
There you
are
go.
paper tigers for the most part. They provide nice vehicles. They look good in uniform. But what we found out was that some of them would rather sit around and drink cappuccino than to go out and close with and defeat the enemies of our effort.
Oh, we're walking on a thin ice here, Senator. Let's slide it to back to America, to the United States military aid to Ukraine, because sorry, saying your, but it's your American domestic policy obviously directly affects the front lines here in Ukraine quite significantly. No doubt about that. But some experts say that the current level of aid, United States, the American aid, is barely sufficient for Ukraine to survive, but not to win in any way. Would you agree to that statement?
I would. I think where we have to draw a line in the sand and make sure that it is not allowed is that we pull back intelligence, because we have such a capability with intelligence. You can affect the war if you can tell your friends what's going to happen before it happens, and that I believe that capability is within American technology, but we got to be willing to do it. Now, if there's a good side to this, it has forced NATO and the EU to come together, not only in resources for Ukraine, but also
Hmm.
start thinking about how to protect themselves and how to organize as a group, less the United States. I don't believe that there's any realistic chance that the United States will leave NATO. We all know that that's a partnership that's a must for the future. And I think some of that is just chest pumping and positioning by the U.S. instead of being realistic.
Chest pumping. I like it. Especially maybe specifically after State of the Union. But never mind. If that will be up to you, sir, what weapons that are critically needed right now here in Ukraine but have not yet been sent, you would have sent?
Well, I would put a lot of pressure on the Germans. That Talos missile that they have is incredibly accurate and can defeat the electronic jamming systems. It is terrain following, much like the Tomahawk, and of course, the Tomahawk would be the other one. And I think for some of us, especially the ones that have a true love for Ukraine and want to see this war end, it is heart wrenching to know that there are the weapon systems that we have that if they were given to Ukraine, the war would end, and it might take a few weeks, but if you could hit those key railheads, bridges, ammunition supply points, I would even open it to harbors. I would open it to the refineries, and I would do it so that these strikes happen in a close sequence of a matter of hours and days, and literally decapitate Russia so that they are forced to end the war. And then, of course, the trick is to make sure that that's a just and fair ending, and there's some security guarantees that come with it.
Well, I mean, it's even painful, somewhat painful to hear that the war could have been stopped in a matter of weeks while it's dragging out for more than like 4 years by now.
Well, there's been a growing process to build, the army and confidence, and but we're at a point now where I just think that we're prolonging this war unnecessarily.
Thank you for that. But I'll make a statement now, and you agree or disagree with that, all right? The pressure on Ukraine to accept territorial concessions, land, only prolong this war and is not helping to end it. Is that right?
Well, if it's prolonging, it's because the Russians have not given on their position. I am a firm believer that you have paid a very dear price in blood and treasure for that land that is your land. You did not invade. You were invaded, and you reward the enemy that invaded you by giving them the very land that you paid such a dear price for. That's not the right answer. I still think that what you do is you put such incredible pressure on Russia, whether it be stopping every ship that you can that's illegally running oil, whether it be to shut down their ports altogether, and
Mm,
even if it means shutting down their airfields across the country to where they can't fly commercial flights,
right.
you have to inflict so much pain that at some point they step back and say, listen, we can't do this anymore. We have to come to a resolution. And that resolution should not include giving away the very land you paid for with your lives.
Well, absolutely. Amen to that. But what if not? If Ukraine does not win, do you think Putin will go further?
I don't think there's anything to indicate that he would not. I mean, he has a burning hatred of Ukraine. I don't think there's any other way to put that. I think that he will do whatever he can somehow justify his actions. If
Right.
he has a ceasefire, it is a chance to reset for him and move assets to build more assets, and then to be ready to get what he originally wanted.
Right.
So, as much as the ceasefire sounds like a great idea, and I know how weary the Ukrainian people are of war, but if what you do gives them a chance to breathe and then be ready to come back with more velocity in their passion to inflict harm upon you, then I think you have only put yourself in a worse position. And that's why I think we're the key point here, where that ceasefire has to come with a security guarantee. And I think America, if they're going to be the ones that want to stick their nose in to be the third party in this, then they need to be the ones that commit resources and manpower to assure that that ceasefire or peace deal is going to stay and isn't going to be something that's on paper that Putin overlooks whenever he gets the desire to go back and start over again.
If tomorrow morning you wake up as the commander in chief of the Ukrainian army, of Ukrainian armed forces, what would be your first order?
Well, I probably have to get a good handle on just what forces we have and where they're at. But I think what is going to have to inevitably be part of what has to be done to win the war is find a way to replicate what happened in the fall of was it 2022 at Kharkiv, where there was the deep penetration. The Russians do not do well on the run. And I think there are probably points along the line where you could do a deep penetration and force them to do a similar withdrawal. I mean, the only thing that kept the Ukrainians from pushing them all the way back to the border at Kharkiv was the fact that they ran out of gas and they didn't have the logistical resources, because they didn't think they'd have that much success to follow on. I would build that so that once you penetrated, that you could then continue to push back to the Russian border. And then I think at some point you have to look at seizing in the south uh, the the ways into Crimea and make Crimea a priority. That seems to be something that people have taken off the table, and I'm not sure why, because that's Ukrainian land just as much as any of the rest of it. Plus, it's very strategic, and I think if the Americans were smart, they'd say, hey, since you got a base there and we're going to guarantee security, we'll just go ahead and park some ships there and we'll do what we can to help you also. But now they have a ready-made facility.
Right.
You have to have some vision, I think, to figure out how you change things, because the stalemate just chews up lives. And granted, it's chewing up more Russian than Ukrainian lives, but Russia puts a lot less value on human life than the Ukrainians do. So, a decisive action that could cause a change systematically in the war is the right answer, and I think it could be done. Again, the Ukrainians have done this before. What they did with the deep penetration up into Kursk was an example of it. The problem is, uh, we don't really want Russian ground. We want Ukrainian ground. If something similar along those lines, and again, I think it's strategically picking that point. They have been pretty good at putting up trench lines and dragon's teeth and minefields. So you have to figure out how to get around that. But if you could do that, then I think you could shorten the war.
So that's a last question for today's interview. I might be wrong here, but this interview in particular, and all you do for Ukraine in general, it sounds and looks like Ukraine's struggle is a personal thing to you. Why?
Well, I think it's personal because from the very first trip I made to the Ukraine, I found a people that were welcoming, that were so different than what I think a lot of Americans perceive them. I mean, they perceive them as a different flavor of Russians, and they are the farthest thing possible from that. They are they are people with more passion, more heart, and this down to earth, what we call homey, very like country folks that welcome you into their home, and they will give you a bowl of borscht, and they will share everything from their family history to their community, and you almost feel like you're back home again if you're from the Midwest. That's the way people are. And so I think it was the actions of the Ukrainian people that won my heart and made me decide that this is going to be my mission in life. Because you reach a point in life, you could go and sit along the river and fish and just take life easy. But I really think that when the dust settles, we're all going to be judged, and you're going to look at that life that you lived, and if you lived it in a way to help folks and to better the world, I think that you're going to have had such a much richer life, and a life of purpose, than if you simply take the easy route.
Senator, from the bottom of my heart, and I must repeat it, I know I've said that again. I'm saying that again because I've said that before when I met you in Kiev. From the bottom of my heart and from the bottom of 40 million hearts of Ukrainians here and all over the world, the people are scattered, as you know. We thank you for what you do and for how you do. Come over when you
We're
can.
planning a trip back in the May-June timeframe, and looking forward to seeing everyone, and hopefully we'll be close to having the war end by then.
Hopefully. Thank you so very much. Goodbye.
Thank
Hope to
you.
see you soon.
Good to see you.